So I think some people at the back just starting to take their seats. I will let you get yourself sorted. But thank you very much for joining us. Hope you managed to get some coffee, tea, refreshments. But a very warm welcome today for those of you here in the room and those of you online as well. I understand that we've got lots of people tuning in online right now, and it's great to have you with us for this session on climate change in Iraq and the threat to its stability. Let me start by introducing the panel. We have with us today Dr. Hassan Janabi. Dr. Janabi was Iraq's Minister of Water Resources between 2016 and 2018. Previously served as Iraq's ambassador to Turkey and Japan, and was also ambassador to Rome-based UN agencies, the Food and Agricultural Organization and the WFP. I think I'm getting a little bit of feedback here. I'm just gonna switch this off. And I'd also like to welcome Maha Yassin, who is a research fellow at the Klingendal Institute. Now, Maha's work focuses on policy research, climate security in Iraq and the Middle East. Maha also manages the Basra Forum for Climate, Environment and Security that brings together a large network of local environmental, climate and security actors in Iraq. So I guess that's exactly the kind of collaboration and exchange of ideas we need in tackling this crisis. And I'd also like to extend a very warm welcome to Michael Mason, Director of the Middle East Center at the LSE, where he is also Associate Professor in Environment Geography and an Associate of the Grantham Research Institute for Climate Change and the Environment. Michael's research addresses global environmental issues, notably the governance of land and water. And I was very pleased to learn, Michael, that your newest publication, The Untold Story of the Golan Heights, is going to be out this week, Thursday the 17th. So yeah, is that right? Yeah, you are very welcome.
Absolutely.
And so a busy week for you, and what a great way to kick things off with a session right here with us. Also, just worth mentioning that Glada Lan of Chatham House was supposed to be here as well. She was going to be joining us via video link from that great hive of activity at the UN Climate Conference in Sharm el-Sheikh, where the great and the good of this world are trying to demonstrate their commitment to tackling global warming. Glada is hard at work and unfortunately couldn't join us, but I'm sure you'll be able to access some of her work and research online. So just a couple of things to remind you of for those of you that are just joining us. There is simultaneous translation available in Arabic through the headsets for those of you in the room. So it's number 2 for Arabic, number 3, I think it is for English. And then also for those of you who are joining us online, there is also a translation feature there. You can access that via the online platform if you click on the little headphones icon at the bottom of the page. It's self-explanatory, but I'm pointing out anyway. The entire conference is being held on the record. It's being live streamed, so that's something you might want to keep in mind. You'll also be able to catch up with any of the sessions that you missed, or if you just want to watch it again because you enjoyed it so much, you can do that too. So they will be available afterwards. Now, please also do tweet whatever social media platforms you like to use. If you are still on Twitter after the big acquisition news of the last few weeks, hashtag Iraq Initiative. So please do tweet if you are there, and my handle is @Mariam Namazi. So you feel free to use that as well. And also the online gathering, please do submit your questions because we want lots of questions from the audience, but those of you online as well, we want you to participate as much as possible. So you can use the chat function. You can submit your questions actually throughout the session, and I'll be able to see them here. And then for those of you obviously in the room, you know how it works. Just tell us your name and affiliation in order to get your question asked. So it's been another year of political drama and unrest in Iraq. I was at this conference last year when we were speaking about government formation. So it seems as though now 1 year on, that has finally happened. But what is interesting when the country goes through a highly charged period of unrest, storming of parliament, green zone, street violence, is that it just seems to overshadow everything else. And that's important because events of the last year, other events of the last year have also shown that Iraq is also facing what is arguably a greater existential crisis than the strains placed on its political system, which is climate change and the very dangerous effects from climate change. So in recent months, we have seen vast regions of Iraq engulfed in dust and sandstorms. This is not unusual, but in terms of severity, it's been unprecedented. It's had a huge effect on the country. At one point, I think it resulted in the closure of government offices. It's dealt a blow to economic activity, transportation, aviation, and perhaps more importantly, it's led to the hospitalization of thousands of people from respiratory issues. So this is something that is very much present. We are seeing the physical manifestations of this deterioration in climate conditions, but also we're seeing it in the destruction of agricultural and farming land. That resulting in the displacement of people moving from rural areas into the city in search of work, which very often they're unable to find, which leaves them vulnerable to armed groups and criminal networks and so on. So it seems to stem from two main things: the rising temperatures and the water scarcity, and that is affecting absolutely everything, right? From economy, household income, food production. So we want to get into all of these issues with the panel that we have today. And I just thought I would start actually with you, Dr. Janabi, because a UN report in 2019 showed that Iraq was the world's 5th most vulnerable country in terms of water and food resources and exposure to extreme heat, temperatures rising at 7 times the global average. Rainfall is in decline. Population growth set to reach 50 million by 2030. You at one time were a government insider. What can you tell us about your experience in the government and why there hasn't been meaningful action to tackle this?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mariam. I'm really pleased to be here. This is not the first time that I'm in Chatham House, but to be privileged to join other distinguished panelists here and in the next day as well. So I also would like, because you promoted Michael's work, I also would like to promote my book. Yeah. And everything that I said in the past, nearly everything, is documented here. And I would like to give a copy of this to the Chatham House, just in case some people would be interested in the thing. So this is my book. So yeah, allow me to switch into Arabic. I was Iraq ambassador to the UN agencies, and the use of Arabic in these meetings is very sensitive to me, because some Arab representatives, they tend to use other languages. So allow me, and I love the Arabic, so allow me to switch into Arabic. I know that you would like to continue in English.
What's not to love? Please speak in.
Yeah, قضية العلاقة بين التغيرات المناخية والأمن أو الاستقرار، هذه مسألة طبعا خطيرة ومهمة، وهذه سبق حتى لمجلس الأمن الدولي أن عقد مداولات لأول مرة في تاريخ مجلس الأمن في جولاي 2018، وأنا كنت شخصيا الوزير الوحيد الذي دعي إلى مجلس الأمن لتقديم يعني وجهة نظر العراق بهذه القضية اللي كانت تعتبر تمثل يعني وجهات نظر كثير من بلدان العالم المتأثرة بالتغير المناخي. فأزمة المناخ وخطورتها على الاستقرار السياسي هذه مسألة مؤكدة. ثم أنا أيضا أود أن أوقع على الستيتمنت أو التصريح الذي يقول بأن التغير المناخي خطر على الاستقرار. هذه واحد، ولكن عندي أيضا وجهة نظر مختلفة عن السائد. طبعا الحكي عن التغير المناخي يتعلق بالتغير المناخي الذي أحدثه التغير البشري، يعني منذ الثورة الصناعية، يعني في لحد هذه اللحظة، وليس التغير المناخي الذي حصل عبر آلاف السنين اللي معروفة يعني الكونسيكونسز تبعها، بما فيها في العراق عندما كان البحر أو الأهوار العراقية تصل إلى حوالي 100-120 كيلومتر عن حدود المائية الحالية للعراق، وهناك بنية أور والوركاء وأريدو اللي كانت مباشرة على المياه وانسحب. هذه تغيرات مناخية طويلة الأمد. لا أعتقد أنه أي شخص من المختصين يتحدث عن هذا التأثير، وإنما يتحدث عن تأثير الثورة الصناعية، بمعنى التدخل البشري بما حصل خلال هذه الفترة لحد هذه اللحظة. وهذا يتعلق بالانبعاثات الغازية أساسا، وهذه الغازات تحتبس في يعني في هذا الجو وتسبب الاحترار المناخي. هذا التأثير في العراق، يعني تأثير الانبعاثات الغازية في العراق، باعتقادي قليل جدا، إن لم يكن يعني بالإمكان إهماله مقارنة بالتأثير الذي أحدثه التدخل البشري في منطقتنا في حوضي دجلة والفرات. بمعنى التغيير الذي حصل في المنابع، من المنابع إلى المصب في حوضي دجلة والفرات والروافد، أخطر بكثير مما يسببه التغير المناخي اللي نحكي عنه. لأن هذا التغير المناخي المحكي عنه الآن في كوب 27 والمؤتمرات السابقة، تأثيره على العراق لا يختلف عن تأثيره على الكويت والسعودية وسوريا وفرنسا واليوكي وما شاكل. ونحن لا نواجه خطرا داهما من هذا الأمر، بل إننا نواجه خطر التفاعل بين الإجراءات والنشاطات المحلية الطابع، سواء كان في العراق أو في دول الجوار، وتأثيرها على تشديد تأثير التغير المناخي في العراق. بمعنى أنه هذه العملية ديناميكية، هناك تفاعل. حتى أقرب صورة هذا التفاعل بين الإجراءات المحلية، وعموما الانفيرومنتاليست يحكون عن يعني think globally and act locally. هذه ليست يعني تصريحا بسيطا، وإنما فعلا يعني يمثل حقيقة. فالذي يحصل، وأجسده بمثال ما حصل في جنوب العراق في الأهوار العراقية. الأهوار العراقية أراضي رطبة تغطي مساحة أكثر من 15,000 كيلومتر مربع عبر التاريخ، يعني أكبر من مساحة لبنان بمرة ونصف. هذه كلها كانت مغطاة بالمياه. فالمياه والأهوار والغابات والأشجار تمثل علميا ما يسمى بالسنك، بمعنى أنه أشعة الشمس عندما تسقط على المياه أو على الغابات لا تنعكس، تغطس سنك بهذه الأماكن. عندما تحول هذه الأراضي الرطبة والمياه إلى أراضي جافة، الحرارة تنعكس مباشرة من سطح الأرض إلى الجو، وبسبب الانبعاثات هذه الحرارة لا تخرج، لا تتلاشى من المحيط الغازي، من الأتموسفير، وتتسبب في احترار مناخي شديد في تلك المنطقة. بمعنى في الصيف على سبيل المثال في مناطق المحافظات الجنوبية العراقية درجة الحرارة كانت أخف مما هو عليه الآن بحوالي يعني 6 أو 7 أو 8 درجات عندما كانت هناك الأهوار، عندما جففت بإجراء بشري. الحكومة السابقة اتخذت قرار سياسي بتجفيف الأهوار لأسباب أمنية وأسباب أخرى، ونجحت إلى حد كبير بتجفيف 90% من الأهوار، بقت 10% لم يكونوا قادرين عليها. مع الأسف في السنتين الأخيرة هذا 10% التي بقت من النظام السابق، بالإضافة إلى ما تم إنعاشه ما بعد 2003، تم تجفيفها تماما بإجراءات وليس قرار سياسي. هناك فرق. الحكومات العراقية المتعاقبة منذ 2003 لحد الآن متعاطفة مع المناطق الأهوار وضحايا الأهوار ومشاكل، وهناك محاكمات جرت أيضا بالمحكمة الجنائية العراقية بهذا المثل، ولكنها جفت بإجراءات من قبل الوزارات المعنية ومنعت المياه من الوصول إلى تلك المنطقة. فالآن أصبح التأثير المناخي اللي يحكون عنه كثير من السياسيين والمحللين وغير المطلعين يحكي عن تغير المناخي للتغطية على فشل أساسي في معالجة هذا الأمر، لأن يجدها سهلة أنه أنت تلوم تغير المناخي، والتغير المناخي شيء خارجي، لا عنده محامي ولا عنده حزب سياسي ولا عنده كذا، تقدر تلقي على التغير المناخي ما تشاء. وهذا ينبع من دافعين. الدافع الأول أنه باعتقادي يعني الجهل منتشر لدى هؤلاء المسؤولين والصحفيين والمحللين بعدم المعرفة. الشيء الثاني هو موقف انتهازي إزاء قضايا وطنية كبرى وعدم اعتراف بعجز حكومي. وأنا لا أجد أي ضرر من أنه الحكومة أو الوزير أو مشاكل يعلن عجزه إزاء قضية ثم to mobilize the nation، وتقف الحكومة مع الشعب، مع الناس، مع المجتمعات المحلية لمحاولة التكيف مع هذا الوضع وعكسه إلى شيء مختلف. ذكرت مريم بأن العراق صنف باعتباره خامس دولة متأثرة بالتغير المناخي. للأسف أنا لا أتفق، ولا يوجد هكذا تقرير من الأمم المتحدة. هذه كذبة انتشرت وركب على هذه الموجة كثير من هؤلاء اللي حكيت عنهم الجهلة وكذا. لا يوجد تقرير من الأمم المتحدة يشير أن العراق خامس دولة. وثم حتى لو كان حقيقي، ما الذي يعني ذلك بالنسبة للمواطن العراقي إذا كنا احنا خامس دولة ولا 10 دولة؟ احنا اللي نشوفه أنه جفاف مستمر، فقر مستمر، إجراءات غير صحيحة، تلوث، موت للمواشي والحيوانات، والقضاء على ما تبقى من الحضارة السومرية لحد هذه اللحظة في مجتمعنا. ولكن التغيرات المناخية طب بالإنجليزي التغير المناخي الجميع متفقين عليه. You can stop me anytime because I can talk until the cow comes home.
So, do you want? I tell you what. Yeah. You can't. Well, do you want to say one more thing?
Yeah. Sorry.
I don't want to interrupt you.
التغير المناخي يعني متفقين عليه كل النشطاء والعلماء وكذا، وحتى السياسيين أيضا أغلبهم على الأقل السياسيين المدركين لهذا الأمر، يسمى threat magnifier. يعني هناك مخاطر بكل مجتمع بكل دولة، هناك مخاطر، جفاف ومشكلات وكذا. التغير المناخي يعمل على زيادة شدة هذه المخاطر. ونحن في العراق نحن نعمل منذ النظام السابق ولحد هذه اللحظة على زيادة حدة التأثير المناخي على شعبنا وعلى مجتمعنا وعلى اقتصادنا نتيجة لإجراءات عديدة نحن مسؤولين عنها، وكذلك دول الجوار. بمعنى شوف دجلة والفرات والروافد منذ نهاية العصر الجليدي 15,000 سنة مضت كانت تجري، وكانت تجري إلى العراق وإلى الخليج، ولم يكن هناك شيء يعني يؤثر على هذا. ولم نسمع كلاما عن التغيرات المناخية إلا مؤخرا. ولكن ما الذي حصل مؤخرا؟ الذي حصل أنه جرت منذ أواسط السبعينات لحد هذه اللحظة سيطرة شاملة على كل قطرة مياه تجري في الرافدين. الآن إذا تتخيل، احنا بالعراق عندنا أكثر من 100 منشأ، more than 100 structure hydraulic structure على المي، نحجزها ونخزنها ونفتحها وهذا الحجز والخزن هذه إجراءات يقوم بها ناس موظفين يعني. وهذا نفس الشيء في تركيا وفي إيران وفي سوريا. الآن إذا تتخيل للحظة إزالة هذه المنشآت عن منابع دجلة والفرات وفي العراق، يرجع الوضع شبيها لما كان سائدا حتى أواسط السبعينات، بمعنى هذه المياه لن تخضع إلى إجراءات تدخل إنساني. وبالتالي إحساسنا بالتغير المناخي اللي المحكي عنه الناتج عن الانبعاثات لن يختلف عن إحساس أي مواطن أوروبي بهذه المسألة. طبعا كانت تحصل بتاريخنا قبل السدود أيضا حالات شحة مائية، ولكن عندما تحصل الشحة المائية لسنة أو سنتين يعني هناك متوقع أن تحصل فيضان. ومعروف في العراق آخر فيضان صار 1988، من ذلك الحين لم تحصل فيضانات في العراق. عام 2019 فيضان استثنائي نتيجة للسيول والأمطار، وفيضان دجلة والفرات والروافد ما له علاقة بالأمطار الكثيفة عموما، يعني علاقته أقل بكثير من علاقته بذوبان الثلوج. الهيدرولوجي بالعراق هو سنو ميلت هيدرولوجي، يتعلق بذوبان الثلوج في الأعالي، وهذا لم يتغير كثيرا حقيقة في العراق. ولكن الذي تسبب بإحساسنا الكبير بتأثير التغير المناخي على حياتنا نابع من إجراءات اتخذوها البشر، أما بإيران أو بتركيا أو بالعراق أو بسوريا، على الأقل بنسبة 99% باعتقادي. وأين ينعكس التغير المناخي؟
I tell you what, we can get into some of that and a bit more, the sort of regional tensions that this is causing with obviously Turkey and Iran. Water scarcity is the biggest challenge, but maybe I could bring Maha in because we will discuss that a bit more. But Maha, we know that the effects of climate change have a long-term impact on a decline in livelihoods if rural populations are forced to move to urban centres, puts a strain on existing services. There's a lack of services. This can lead to tensions and disputes between tribes, but also within these communities. What do we know of the relationship today between climate and conflict in Iraq?
Thank you, Mariam, and thank you to the Chatham House for this timely discussion. In fact, I have listed 4 ways or 4 pathways of how climate change undermines security and stability in Iraq. The first one is the intergovernmental tension over water shares, and this is mostly happening in the southern region of Iraq. In fact, all these pathways concentrated in the southern part of the country. We see these intergovernmental tensions mostly in Basra, Nisan, Diqar, and Wasat, where basically accusations of breaching water shares between these provinces, and also not addressing illegal fish farming. Some of these provinces have actually filed legal complaints to solve this issue. Of course, these are tensions, have not escalated yet into conflict, but given the political parties that govern these, the historical conflict between these political parties that rules these provinces, it could escalate into a security threat in the future, especially if we know that the drought in Iraq might continue for the next 2 years. The other pathway of conflict is, of course, the tribal ones, and this is also happening in the south, either because of competing over scarce water shares, or because of desertification that is more obvious in this region, where a tribe send their animal to graze in the land of another tribe, and conflict erupt. And of course, the nature of these conflicts are intense, armed, and I've been there and I saw them. It's like a battlefield over there.
This is a battle between tribes.
Between the tribes,
Yeah.
and sometimes it requires the interference of the army or security forces to solve it.
But can they solve it if the tribes are armed with weapons?
This is the problem, and it actually also takes years and generation inherited. So solving it, I think one of the proposal was moving a whole tribe to another region, but this is also brings another set of problems. And the other pathway is, and maybe the most severe one, is the conflict or protest between citizens and authorities. This is also happening in the south, especially in the summer months where temperature hits 50 and when salinization problem becomes worsened. And so every time, like this is almost happening in Basra, that the media doesn't cover it anymore because it's a recurrent issue.
So 2018, when I think there was
that was the tipping point when
before the pandemic, when there was coverage, but
and of course after
worse.
that we saw the protest that in 2019. So the protest that happens in 2018 was because of a water issue that gave the, let's say, it gave the reason to, like, for Iraqi people, of course, to take this as a reason to ask for reform to address
culminated
this.
in the Tishreen movement. Yeah.
Exactly. And the other issue is, of course, climate migration, and this is something that you mentioned, from farming communities to urban centers, bringing a lot of other social tensions because there is pressure on the fragile infrastructure, there is accusations of criminality, drug trade, and one of the recent policies that these local governments to stop this influx of migrants is to deny them the rights of registration, which also prevented their children going to school. And this is actually add more frustration that could develop into also another wave of protest. I think these are the four main pathways. Yeah.
Well, thank you for laying that out, and we can get into some of what you mentioned a bit later on after we get a word in from Michael, because climate in the Middle East and North Africa overall, Michael, I know that you look at the region, it's warming, twice as fast as the global average temperature rise, is that right? But then in Iraq, it's happening 2 to 7 times faster. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has said that the region is extremely vulnerable to climate change because of rising temperatures just when water supplies are declining at the same time. So can I ask your view then of the COP summit that's taking place in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt and Iraq's regional positioning on climate change?
Thank you. Thank you, Mariam. Thank you to my actually fellow guests. Good to meet you, and to Chatham House for the invitation. I agree with my fellow guests. I agree Dr. Hassan said about climate change is not the primary cause for the current water crisis situation in Iraq. We can go into that perhaps in discussion and questions. But in terms of the COP, I'm a geographer, so excuse me if I start talking like a geographer, but just to give a little bit of a primer about where we are in terms of UNFCCC, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Remember, the core objective of the UNFCCC is to prevent a concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, which will cause dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. Okay? IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has announced anything above 2 degrees centigrade increase compared to pre-industrial levels is dangerous climate change. The Paris Agreement is designed to ensure that countries agree to emission reductions which do not go above that. But in fact, to aim for 1.5, no higher than 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. 1.5 is severe climate change. The difference, according to the scientists, is 1.5, you're going to have some mass ice sheet melting, Western Antarctica, Greenland, maybe most of the coral reefs will be potentially irreversibly damaged. Dangerous climate change, 2 degrees centigrade, is almost all coral reefs wiped out, okay, and mass ice sheet melting in Greenland, Antarctica, leading to increased sea level rise. Okay, so that's where we are. Just prior to, at COP27, a bunch of reports have come out, even though those of us in the profession, as it were, have to kind of work hard to keep up with the numerous reports on climate change. Just a couple of key ones. Okay, there's something called the Global Carbon Budget report was announced, which is produced by a consortium of universities, including UEA here in the UK, and that announced what the current concentration of CO2 is in the atmosphere. It's 417 parts per million. That's 50% above pre-industrial levels, okay? The Global Carbon Budget Project said there is now a 50% probability that we will exceed 1.5 degrees centigrade increase within the next 9 years. Okay, so the climate scientists, the climate scientific community, as synthesized by Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, have said this is a serious issue. This is a very serious issue, and the current commitments by governments under the COP system, to go back to COP27, under the informed by something called the Paris Agreement, many of these countries' commitments include an unconditional and conditional element. Okay, the only taking into account unconditional elements, UNEP reported before COP27 we would hit 2.8 degrees centigrade. Taking into account also conditional commitments are conditional on financial assistance, technological kind of know-how being shared, we'll get to 2.4. Okay, so that's where we are. We're at a moment in which we have to ratchet up ambition. Iraq has its own, what's called nationally determined contribution, commitment to climate change mitigation action, which is reducing emissions between 1-2% by 2030, unconditional, conditional 15% during that period, subject to international financial assistance and technological assistance, okay? So one of the big issues at COP27, where we are at the moment at COP27, is developing countries are pushing hard for a step change in global climate finance. The developing country groups, various developing country groups, are pushing hard for a dedicated loss and compensation fund. Developed country groups are pushing back. So no, we have a whole suite of climate financing already within the international UNFCCC system. We have a GEF fund, we have a global climate fund, we have special funds for adaptation and so forth. But much is now being kind of concentrating around this issue of loss and compensation. Why is that important? That's important because it would release, in principle, larger amounts of climate finance for developing countries to undertake more climate change adaptation. One of the issues around COP27 at the moment is some parties are saying the Egyptians are not really pushing things hard enough, so not enough has been agreed at this stage compared to previous COPs. There are arguments, particularly over something called Article 6 in the Paris Agreement, which is a sort of emissions trading scheme. How would that work? What would be the price of carbon? Fossil fuel lobby is pushing hard against anything which would involve, say, a high carbon price. And what's happening in terms of the regional grouping? Saudi Arabia usually dominates the lobbying of the Arab group, and it's doing again this time. Saudi Arabia, this is interesting for Iraq. Iraq's positioning is, on the one hand, having support from the international community to commit to major climate change adaptation. I know people here, if there are folks here from FCDO, UK Aid is supporting a major UNDP program in Iraq called Catalytic Climate Action in Iraq, doing great stuff. But at the same time, the Saudis are pushing for a kind of perspective. It's possible to continue producing, extracting fossil fuels, but somehow delinking fossil fuel extraction and use from what they call fugitive emissions, from the greenhouse gas emissions. That would be done, they say, through something, the enhanced use of something called carbon capture, utilization, and storage. This is unproven at a large scale. But on the basis of this proposition, we have Saudi Arabia leading what I would call the petrostates in the region, and in this context, Iraq is one of the petrostates. I think now getting still 90% of its government income from fossil fuel revenues. Yeah. So we have, on the one hand, the petrostate kind of outlook saying, no, we can continue extracting, using, producing, processing fossil fuels because there's a technical fix. There's a technical fix that will take away all those greenhouse gas emissions, so-called fugitive emissions. On the other hand, international community, developed countries pushing for meaningful climate change mitigation action, increased emission reductions. And Iraq being part of international developed community, or developed countries anyway, supporting Iraq, saying we will support your adaptation sort of activities on the basis of you being a responsible member of the international climate change community, pushing also for climate change mitigation reductions. Hence, Iraq's nationally determined commitments to reduce climate change emissions. But in terms of the responsibility is overwhelmingly historical. For industrialized countries, as Dr. Hassan said, in terms of industrial revolution, this is why a lot of the debate at COP27 is around this issue of responsibility, loss, compensation. Some activists are even talking about reparations.
Well, yeah, but they've not been able to reach an agreement. This has been a perpetual issue holding back COP, hasn't it? Loss and damage to developing nations. It's good that it's on the agenda at this COP summit, but I don't know that they're going to find a solution. Hopefully they will. But apart from the things that you mentioned just there, and maybe Hassan, you might have some thoughts on this, but I mean, oil is the lifeblood of Iraq's economy. You're mentioning Saudi Arabia there, but since we're talking about Iraq, what happens then to exports and government budget if the world reaches net zero emissions by 2050? How vulnerable is Iraq in terms of that shift to decarbonization?
طبعا العراق يعاني من هشاشة كبيرة جدا في الاقتصاد، وهو أيضا يرتبط ارتباط عضوي بالهشاشة السياسية، بمعنى ما بعد 2003 نظامنا يعاني من عدم الاستقرار، نظامنا يعاني من عدم وجود معارضة حقيقية لما يجري، ونظامنا أصبح قائما على توزيع المغانم على أحزاب سياسية لا تخضع للمحاسبة. والنفط هو موردنا الأول حقيقي. الزراعة في الخمسينات والستينات كانت تمثل نسبة عالية جدا من الجي دي بي، ما أعرف الجي دي بي شلون أقولها بالعربي، نعم، من الناتج القومي المحلي. وفي هذه الأوقات منذ 20 ربما حتى ما أربطها فقط بما بعد 2003، لا حتى قبل 2003 لا تشكل إلا نسبة ضئيلة جدا من هذه. ثم تحولت القطاع المائي والزراعي تحول إلى قطاعين طفيليين يعيشان فقط إذا كانت هناك إذا كان هناك نفط يباع وهناك أسعار. هي لا يمكن إدامة أي قطاع إذا لم يكن مربحا. فحتى تبقى الزراعة يجب أن تكون الزراعة مربحة، حتى تبقى الخدمات التي تقدم إلى النظام المائي يجب أن يكون، إن لم يكن مربحا، أن يكون على الأقل يدفع لكلفة الصيانة والاستدامة. هنا فكرة الاستدامة. ولهذا في العراق نتيجة أيضا للمحاصصة أصبح الاعتداء على الأماكن الخضراء ممارسة يومية، وكل فضاءات المدن ومحرمات الأنهر وزعت أراضي للبناء وتوسعت المدن بشكل عشوائي. ونفس هؤلاء الذين وزعوا هذه أو استولوا على هذه المساحات الخضراء وعلى محرمات الأنهار وما شاكل، هم يطلع بالتلفزيون يحكي يقول هذا التغير المناخي يسبب لنا ارتفاع درجة الحرارة والعواصف الترابية وما شاكل. فالعراق البترول هو اللايف لاين بالنسبة للعراق، وإحنا ينتظرنا مستقبل خطير جدا إن لم تستخدم إيرادات العراق من النفط بالاتجاه الصحيح بمعنى تحقيق تنمية مستدامة.
Is any kind of response to the climate crisis, climate adaptation, mitigation, even possible within the constraints of the current political system where state institutions that are supposed to serve the people are monopolized and politicized by certain groups, where we have these patronage networks. It means that, essentially this is not even on the government's radar, is it?
Yes. مريم، لا يوجد في العراق، وأنا هنا مع ناس مسؤولين كبار ووزراء سابقين وزملاء يعني، وكل احنا وطنيين، أنا لا أطعن بوطنية أحد يعني. لا يوجد في العراق لحد هذه اللحظة أي مشروع يرتبط بما يسمى بالتكيف مع التغيرات المناخية، لا بالكهرباء ولا بالمي ولا بالخدمات ولا بأي شيء. لا يوجد أصلا. عملية التكيف غائبة، أو مقاربة التكيف غائبة تماما عن البرامج الحكومية، بما فيها الحكومة الحالية، وهم أصدقاء يعني ونتمنى لهم كل الخير لهذه. كيف يجري تكيف مع إجراءات؟ أنا أمام بيتي مساحة كبيرة كانت مساحة خضراء، اجى مستثمر في يوم، أنا كنت غائب عن البيت، اجيت في يوم لقيت سياج وهذا يسوي مول، ثم ترك المشروع بسبب خلل بالتمويل أو فساد بالعملية، متوقف الآن صار مكب للنفايات. ومن يمثل هذا المستثمر يحكي عن التغير المناخي. لهذا السبب أنا أقول نحن بحاجة إلى مقاربة حقيقية وجادة باتجاه التكيف. يجب أن يرتبط أي مشروع في العراق للتنمية بأن يكون تأثيره على البيئة أما محايد أو يكون مفيدا للبيئة. احنا ما عندنا في شيء، هذه الكرايتيريا ما موجودة، هذا الاعتبار ما موجود بكل مشاريعنا، لا بمشاريع الموانئ ولا بمشاريع الشوارع ولا بمشاريع المدن. أنا الآن في مدينة قريبة أنا أسكن، وعندي الماستر بلان للمدينة until 2050. الماستر بلان للمدينة وتوسعها لا يجري باتجاه الصحراء المجاورة بمعنى تحويلها إلى يعني بيوت وخضار وجراوند ووتر ومعروف إيه، يجري إلى النهر. يعني هالمساحات الزراعية التي من الممكن أن تكون سلة الغذاء للمدينة المتوسعة مستقبلا، هذه أخذت للمستثمرين. لا توجد. من أين إذن أصبح الاستيراد هو المورد الأساسي لسوق الغذاء في العراق، في حين الزراعة لحد هذه اللحظة as we speak تستهلك أكثر من 70% من إيراداتنا المائية، ولكن الإنتاج الغذائي العراقي المحلي لا يغطي 30% من حاجة السوق. العملية معكوسة تماما. هنا الآن هل هذا يحصل بعصا سحرية أو معروف إيش؟ لا، أنا أريد أوصل هذه الرسالة أنه إحنا يجب أن نعي هذه القضية، يجب أن نتوقف عن إلقاء اللوم على شماعة التغير المناخي، وننظر ببرامجنا، برامج سواء كانت الأحزاب السياسية أو الحكومات ومشاكل هنا تكمن أنه تحويل هذه الثروة النفطية إلى تحقيق تنمية مستدامة. otherwise يتعاركون الجماعة بالمحاصصة على الإيرادات النفط يعني.
What about foreign direct investment? I don't know, Hassan, or even Maha or Michael, if you have, maybe Michael, we could come to you on this because you look at the way in which these systems work and how they're built. But of course, Iraq can't do it alone, right? They need investment in renewable energy, investment in conserving water, stopping desertification. But for that to happen, there has to also be a safe, attractive environment for the investors. And so there we come back to this issue of political reform, economic transformation.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, I was involved with a team looking at the water infrastructure in Basra Governorate in southern Iraq, and trying to address the paradox of the quite substantial international investment in water infrastructure in Basra and the lack of progress. And our researcher did a fantastic job, because I read a lot of reports about water and the situation in the south, but very few of them, if any, had actually talked to the water plant managers and engineers. So we got access to the water engineers and the water plant managers and also civil society actors in the water plants. And there's not sort of lack of, in this case, it's sort of international donors, JICA, a Japanese international cooperation agency, massive, the Great Basra Water Project, other donors, European donors. And we noticed that a lot of these grand projects, they were stalled. They weren't happening. Okay, Basra was dependent when we were doing research on overwhelmingly in terms of water treatment on small compact water treatment units, 300 across the governorate. And so we looked at that as a technology. And the issue, to cut a long story short, actually the report is here if anyone's interested. So there's another plug, which is on the LSE Middle East website, English and both Arabic versions, called Failing Flows. The issue was basically the political system blockage. It was the corruption, it was the racketeering. There were projects, JICA particularly suffered with the Great Basra Water Project in terms of demands made by particular groups, often backed with violence, that you will not start constructing here unless this happens. You must employ these workers. Sometimes they're related to employment contracts. And this is very, very difficult for international donors with all the due diligence that they do. Imagine how much more difficult for sort of private investors to going into an environment where you're questioning whether the rules of the game around contractual sort of responsibilities around investment, how safe is your investment. So I think there's certainly obligation for the international community, at least in water infrastructure in Basra, to treat this as a critical water infrastructure and to assist the Iraqis in terms of the types of investments that would need to take place. I won't go into detail. In the report, we're saying if you frame this as critical water infrastructure, the philosophy is there as to how you engineer a resilient water infrastructure system. It's based around things like redundancy. You do not rely on single sources. One of the problems in the south is the extraction of 60% of the water in Basra extracted from the Shatt al-Arab. This is incredibly polluted. Okay, water from all sorts of sources, industrial pollution, agricultural pollution. The rest of the water comes from a canal, 240-kilometer canal called the Badr Canal, okay, which takes water both from the Euphrates and the Tigris, pumps it into Basra. It was a failure of the flow in summer 2018 from the Badr Canal, resulting in increased extraction from the Shatt al-Arab, which caused the big, massive water crisis in summer 2018 in Basra, which had lots and lots of protests. So what you have to do, there's a suggestion, for example, including international investment, for a massive desalination plant, Al-Fal in the south, would produce 1 million cubic meters of water a day when online. Even that's been delayed. There's been a whole host of delay of major infrastructure projects which would help to address some of the water scarcity issues, water availability issues, I should say, rather than scarcity in the region. It's not for want of lack of technology. It's not for want of lack of investment. It's the governance system which allows those infrastructural interventions to be effective.
So it'd be good to take some. What I was going to say, it's good to take some questions now. Where is the mic? Yeah. And then I promise I'll come to the rest. Yeah. This guy.
Hi. Yes. My question for Michael first is about the. He talked about the climate change adaptation fund. Where's the accountability for giving money to a corrupt government or politicians who just do nothing, but just like promise the earth and then do nothing? And for the minister, Mr. Hassan, you were minister for 2 years?
Yeah.
And you talked about drought. What action did you take yourself to mitigate the issue of the drought, like locally, not internationally?
Okay, so do you want to take that? Do you want to quickly answer that first?
Yeah.
About your question was to Michael. Your first question was to
about
Michael.
Adaptation, yeah. Yeah, I mean, under the UNFCCC anyway, this is an international system, state-based, public international law. So states have the responsibility of undertaking sort of responsibilities within that international framework, and that's vested obviously in the sovereign national governments of those particular states. So that's the accountability line. The extent to which with any particular state they are dispersing the funds in an appropriate or efficient way is a matter, I think, for that domestic society. What I would say is that there is some excellent proposals for effective adaptation actions in Iraq coming from civil society. There's something called the Mesopotamia Revitalization Initiative, developed by Azam Alwash and Nature Iraq, on a nature first adaptation green growth strategy for Iraq, which has received some attention in the government, based partly around the restoration of the continued restoration of the Mesopotamian marshes, of assistance to agriculture. So, you know...
No, because we've got to get to other questions, sorry. Yeah, well, I tell you what, we will get... Do you want to quickly answer that question, yeah?
I mean, أنا كنت وزير 2016 2018 2018 كانت فترة جافة جدا، أكثر جفافا من الفترة الحالية حقيقة، والخطر فيها كان حصول التلوث في شبكة توزيع المياه في البصرة وتسمم عشرات الآلاف من المواطنين. ولكن المواطنين نتيجة لسوء فهم لدور الوزارات، احنا القطاع المائي قطاع مجزأ is not consolidated. وزارة الموارد المائية اللي كنت أنا وزيرها معنية بالمياه الخام، أما المياه الاستخدامات المنزلية مياه الشرب هي وزارة أخرى، وزارة البلديات. ووزارة البلديات حولت بال2003 ما بعد 2003 صلاحياتها إلى حكومات محلية. هناك كانت المشكلة مياه ملوثة وليس المياه ولكن بسبب وجود كلمة الموارد المائية في وزارة الموارد المائية، فالمواطن يجدها سهلة أنه يلقي اللوم على الموارد المائية، أما وزارة البلديات تكون شوية بعيدة. ولكن أعطيك مثال واحد، وهذا أعتقد مهم للأودينس، اللي له علاقة بالمقاربة، يعني مقاربة التكيف مع الأوضاع الجديدة اللي نشاهدها. شوف قناة البدعة ذكرها مايكل 240 متر تجيب لنا 5 متر أو 6 متر مكعب من المياه من ذنائب نهر الغراف شمال الناصرية إلى البصرة. المشكلة في البصرة ليست المورد المائي اللي واصل إلها، وإنما بقلة أو عدم توفر المياه في منطقة البدعة اللي تبدأ فيها القناة، وهذه المياه مسيطر عليها يعني تركيا وإيران وإلى آخره إلى آخره. الحكومة الماضية يعني حكومة السيد الكاظمي خصصت 3 مليار دولار لتحويل هذه القناة إلى قناة أنبوبية دكتايل، وهذه 3 مليار دولار بدأت يعني تنصرف الآن، وسوف لن تحل 5% من مشكلة مياه البصرة. يعني المشكلة هي ليست بالنقل، ليست بالترانسبورتيشن اوف ووتر من البدعة للبصرة، وإنما بوجود الماء في هذه القناة، بدلا من بناء desalination plant محطة تحلية اللي تحل مشكلة البصرة إلى الأبد. هذا استثمار ما له علاقة بالتكيف أبدا، وإنما سوء استخدام للأموال، ولا أريد أن أقول أكثر من هذا. وأجيب مثال آخر أيضا يهمني يسمعوه، اسمحي لي، you have to put up with me مريم. مثال آخر، نحن في هذه الشحة القاتلة في العراق، المزارعين ما يستطيعون الزراعة، القرى انهجرت، الحيوانات ماتت، وخصصت الحكومة الماضية 3 مليار دولار لبناء سد على نهر دجلة، وإحنا ما عندنا مي، وأنت تصرف 3 مليار على بناء سد مكحول، وهذا السد مكحول. هناك نتائج يعرفها الدكتور العزيز وزير الثقافة، هناك أكثر من 200 موقع أثري، فيما إذا حصل فيضان وامتلأ السد سوف يقضي على هذه الآثار على سبيل المثال، ثم سيهجر عشرات سكان عشرات القرى ومشاكل. وهنا خصصت الحكومة 3 مليار دولار لبناء سد في وقت ليس وقته. بناء السدود بالمناسبة ليست مقاربة عراقية فقط، وإنما مقاربة إقليمية. الإيرانيين يبنون سدود، والسوريين يبنون سدود، والعراقيين يبنون سدود، وهو الماء ماكو. فإحنا ما نحتاج بناء سدود، إحنا نحتاج شلون نعظم كفاءة استخدام المياه على سبيل المثال. يعني المقاربة لهذا الأمر يجب أن تكون مختلفة جذريا للتعاطي مع هذه المشكلة، وإلغاء أو محاولة على الأقل إيقاف، لأن احنا ما نقدر نفلش هذا الشبكة من السدود والمنشآت، ولكن تشغيلها بما يسمح بما يسمى بالانفيرمنتال فلو، يعني أقل شيء يؤمن أنه حياة التنوع الأحيائي، بقاء المزارعين إلى آخره، وفصل مياه، قطاع مياه الشرب، الناس اللي تشرب بغض النظر عن أنه في شحة ولا ما في شحة يجب أن تشرب، يجب أن تفصل قطاع الشرب عن هذا وتسوي ديسالينيشن بلان. وكل المدن العراقية احسبوها علي هذه، سجلوها، كل المدن العراقية مستقبلا راح تحتاج ديسالينيشن بلانز، وإحنا لحد هذه اللحظة ما عندنا محطة تحلية واحدة في العراق. وإذا أريد أحكي لكم على البصرة، وهذا الكتاب هناك فصل كامل عن هذا الأمر وكيف نحل مشكلة البصرة هذه ما معدومة يعني، بما فيها في حكومة السيد السوداني. والسيد السوداني نفسه كان رئيس لجنة لحل مشكلة البصرة، وهناك ريكومنديشن مهمة جدا في وقتها. البارحة شفته يجتمع مع محافظ البصرة وآخرين، إن شاء الله يفعل ما اقترحه سابقا في حكومة العبادي. طيب sorry.
I tell you what, we're getting quite a few questions online as well, so I'll take a couple more questions here and then we'll move online. So this gentleman here, and can you please say your name and your affiliation?
مساء الخير، اسمي أحمد علاء، أنا من منظمة المسلة. بصراحة عندي عدد من القضايا حاب أطرحها بشكل سريع جدا. الأولى من عندها حول حتى نربط القضايا ببعضها البعض. أنا أتصور واحدة من أهم القضايا اللي لازم نناقشها نربطها بالجلسة السابقة هو تصدي لمواقع المسؤولية. اليوم المتصدين لمواقع المسؤولية أغلبهم فيما يتعلق بالقضايا البيئية أغلبهم هم بعيدين عن الخلفية العلمية
Can you keep it short? Just ask the question.
short,
Sorry,
very short.
I just want to get to our question.
Very short. بعيدين بشكل أساسي عن القضايا البيئية وعن التصدي لهذه المواقع، فبالتالي احنا نختلف بشكل جذري حول مفهومنا للمحاصصة أنه يكونون أشخاص بعيدا عن الانتماء الديني والطائفي والقومي. القضية الثانية حول الحقوق المائية. سبق أن التقينا بالسيد الوزير.
Who's your question for? I've got so many questions online. I've been told I have to get to them. We've only got a few minutes. Who's the question for?
To Dr. Hassan Janami.
Okay, so just ask the question, yeah?
سابقا التقينا حول وطرحنا موضوع الشكوى العراقية واستخدام ملف الأهوار للضغط أكثر حول دول المنبع على دول المنبع. هل ما زلت ترى أن لجوء العراق إلى الشكوى بمجلس الأمن هو إجراء صعب جدا؟ وحول أيضا سؤالي حول قانون البيئة وعدم تفعيله. لماذا تتعثر الحكومة العراقية بعدم تفعيل قانون البيئة علما أنه هو راح يعالج كثير من القضايا التجاوزات وخصوصا على قضايا الأنهر؟ شكرا.
Okay. Can you answer briefly? Yeah.
Shorter than the question.
Excellent. Great.
المسؤولين بعيدين عن البيئة أنت قلت، وأنت تشوف الآن هذه الحكومة ما فيها وزير بيئة، لأنه وزير البيئة خاضع للنقاشات بين الحزبين الكرديين بعد ما متفقين على واحد، فالبيئة محاصصة يعني. ثانيا الشكوى العراقية في مجلس الأمن هذه كذبة كبيرة ابتدعها السيد وزير الموارد المائية العراقي السابق، ولا توجد في العراق شكوى لا بمجلس الأمن ولا أبدا، وإنما تسويق إعلامي يقوله وين ما يروح يقوله مع الأسف لهذا، وهو ما يعرف، لا يعرف يعني حدود مسؤولياته ولا يعرف أيضا عواقب الاتفاقات الموجودة الدولية وعضوية بعض هذه أيضا ما موجودة. أما عدم تفعيل قانون البيئة فهسه وزير بيئة ما عندنا، فما راح يفعلون يعني.
Just this gentleman here and then this lady and then we'll come to you.
Yeah, thank you. It's my name is Awad Mustafa. I'm the representative for Barzani Charity Foundation for internationally. I have so much to say, but I'm going to make it very, very
Please,
short.
if you don't mind.
Just I'm going to remind you of one of the research made by Al Ansar. Research paper was done for one of the conference in Spain, which is really was exactly you said that. By the end of the century, the Iraq will probably lose 75% of the entire water simply because of the Iran and Turkey's really it's that the mass constructions of dam. My question is to make it short. Iraq, sovereign country, can't be a sovereign country without water. and Iraq really militarily, politically is very weak to really defend itself against both very powerful regional country. What Iraq can do internationally to prevent further shortage of water or the water dam built by both countries? Thank you.
Well, yes.
Yeah, also
Just very
shorter
quickly,
than
very
that.
quickly.
أنا قلت ربما إذا ما قلت هسه أنا كاتب كثيرا إحنا عندنا 70% من المياه العراقية تأتي من خارج الحدود الوطنية. عندنا 30% أحيانا يعني بين 20 إلى 30% تنتج محليا. المقاربة لو كنت أنا في الحكومة وعندي قدرة على إطلاق مبادرات بعيدة المدى أنا سوف أهدف إلى أن يبقى العراق مستقلا ويعيش بهاي 20 إلى 30% مما ينتجه من المياه عن طريق تدوير يعني تطوير بدائل سواء ديسالينيشن أو إعادة تدوير أو مشاكل وياها البوليتيكال دايمنشن التفاوض مع بلدان الأخرى لتحقيق والحصول على حقوق العراق المائية المعروفة يعني. فطبعا لا يمكن لأي بلد إذا كان ما عنده أي بديل يعني الآن الستورج كاباسيتي الآن السعة المنصوبة على نهري دجلة والفرات من التخزين في دول الخليج العفو في دول الجوار تزيد ب3 مرات بقدر إيرادات السنوية لهذه الأنهار 3 سنين. يعني بإمكانهم أن يغلقون البوابات 3 سنين ما تجينا ولا قطرة. فربط السيادة بهذه المسألة ليست سهلة يعني أنا متأسف أنا قد أبدو نيجاتيف أو كذا بس أنا يعني أرفع علم يعني I raise a flag is very important للحكومة. الحكومات لا تزال في بداية تشكلها. This is longer than his question.
It's okay. Michael, do you have a thought on that? Very quick.
Two sentences. Firstly, to run on from the first panel, that there is some significance in terms of the elections in Iraq and the appointment of certain ministers with responsibility. That accountability is not completely absent, but of course, it's very, very imperfect. But the new water minister, Al-Thayib, has been appointed, partly I understand, to directly address the water problem in Basra. He's from Basra. Second sentence about the regional situation. As we know, there's some bilateral agreements, Syria, Iraq, Turkey, quite weak. There is discussion about Iraq joining the international sort of transboundary watercourses convention. Okay, if that were to happen, this is the sort of area the international community is crucial in supporting Iraq to help to develop a basin-wide international agreement about the Euphrates Tigris waters. If you join that convention, there's all sorts of principles and norms around equitable and reasonable use. There's assistance around formulating a transboundary water agreement. So that's where the push has to be.
We did join.
Oh, have you joined now?
Yeah, we joined this ACE, the Water Convention, and also we are party to all these environmental conventions.
But no official water sharing agreement with your neighbours upstream.
Like Iran and Turkey are not members of this convention.
Okay.
So this is an issue as well. Although this does not mean that they have no responsibility or it is international water law does not differentiate between members and non-members. There are certain, the customary laws could apply, and there's a lot of moral and political obligations on the membership in these that our neighbors, they don't respect.
Just a very quick one, Michael, that they've not resolved the dam dispute, the Ethiopian Renaissance dam dispute with Sudan
Egypt,
and Egypt and Sudan. So that's been going on for ages. So this could just be a continuous, long-running.
And Hassan said, there's customary international water law. So regardless of whether you're in a treaty or not, there are certain principles governing transboundary water use, which are not happening at the moment in terms of flows from Turkey and Iran and Syria into Iraq.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Jihan Baban. I'm the president of the Iraqi Environment and Health Society UK and the Renewable Energy and the Climate Change Center in the UK. I have a question for, first of all, I welcome Dr. Hassan Janabi. He contributed to our society before and he supported the conference was on desertification and water scarcity in Iraq. The first question is, do you see lack of continuity in management of water resources between administration as a contribution factor to the accelerated desertification and drought by not following agreement priorities and decisions? As myself, a registered chartered environmentalist, I believe in sustainability and continuity. The next question for Michael. What are the targets that Iraqi, in your opinion, what are the targets that Iraqi authorities should address to deal with the climate justice aspect of climate change, particular impact on women, children, and isolated rural communities that are focused to mitigate to urban areas? Thank you.
That's an excellent question. And maybe Maha, because you've not heard so much from you, maybe you could help us understand. As with many things, it's ethnic minorities, tribal minorities, but also women that are disproportionately affected by this issue.
Yeah, indeed, like women and children are affected, and we see this happening mostly in rural areas or farming communities where they are forced to leave it. So first of all, the migration that happens is like the men in the family move, and then if they find opportunities, then the whole family leaves. But then with the new regulations of the southern provinces, that it prevents them from, for example, access services. They cannot go to school for the children, and they live in slums where they do not have access to water. So this is their bad situation will continue even after they migrate. So the situation will continue even after they migrate. And in terms of, I go back to the security situation or the link with the security. Even though my colleagues here painted a little bit of a pessimistic view, I do believe that there is a recognition of climate change affecting or adding another layer of instability in Iraq among the political circles. It could be like
They understand the gravity of the seriousness of it.
Well, it started, at least, for example, the National Security Advisory, they wanted to include climate change as a threat multiplier. So we can say that there is a movement within the Iraqi government to recognize the climate change, but as Dr. Hassan said, this could be a way to blame climate change, not their responsibility, not their mismanagement. But I also do believe that one of the solutions is that is environmental peace building. How can we actually start mitigation and adaptation if these actors involved do not talk to each other? And this is something that we try to do, that we bring these in the Basra Forum, that we bring all these different actors from the government, political parties, and also academia, civil society to sit together and to talk about this, the climate change as a threat affecting everyone equally, and use it as an entry point for peace building that paves the way for better adaptation and mitigation.
And is that where the future lies, perhaps, Michael, in terms of investment as well? The thing, civil society actors, movements, bringing different forms of expertise, whether it be science, technology, engineering, security, together to find solutions, and can they also cultivate the trust of foreign investors and donors?
Yeah, there are situations where I think the phrase climate justice makes sense, but often we're just talking about social justice. We're talking about the contract between the state and its population, and the composition of that. Yeah, in terms if we talk about water and food access, availability, adequacy, and so forth. In terms of the the wider political environment, this is a question and a decision for the Iraqi people as to what sort of society they want to live in. But one of the best conditions for increasing your resilience to climate-related stresses or other related stresses around water availability It's basically economic development. Economic development buys you that resilience in terms of your sort of ability, for example, to import products with so-called virtual water in them, and not to be so dependent on specific resources. So that's the kind of whole society, whole economy thinking, I think, that you need, rather than sometimes there's a danger partitioning off climate change and climate change stresses from those wider societal, political, economic questions.
Thank you. And maybe we'll take 2 more questions and then one from online. You had a question, the gentleman in the front.
Thank you very much again, Hassan Nazem. I just want to check something with Dr. Janabi, that when we voted in the previous government for Bed'a project, just because of the wasting water there on all these, 100-something kilometers. And I know there is another decision for the previous government about saving the green areas in Baghdad. What has left, it's about 4% percentage only. So this is a question, but I discussed with you the influence of the climate change on the cultural heritage, which is something I'm going to discuss it tomorrow, inshallah. But I heard that there is a huge influence in the cultural heritage, particularly in the archaeological sites you just mentioned. So to what extent that will affect the cultural heritage in Iraq? This is the question. And of course, the Bed'a project mentioned by Michael as well, not just this justification for the decision of the government, but this is the real base that, we took that decision at that time. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Excellency Dr. Hassan. Yes, the transportation loss, we have water losses. There is something called transportation loss. You put a water at a certain point and it gets to other point. So there's losses. The losses in Bed'a this is, I think, 59 or 56 kilometers, to which they spend $1 billion to basically to prevent the losses. The losses, how much in that section of the canal? Is only 10%. This canal gets to Al-Basra, the so-called R0 location there, is about 5 cubic meters per second. For the last 20 years, 30 years, 5 to 6. So we are spending $1 billion to make it 5.5. What an investment. But if you spend this $1 billion, you solve the problem of the entire city of Basra in terms of drinking water supply via desalination. And this is, of course, a condition for this 10% to be saved is to get the water to the inlet, to that particular place, which is completely unrealistic. We are not sure how we can get the water there. So it is bad investment, Dr. Hassan, and perhaps, I don't know, misinterpretation of the thing then led the government to vote on this and invest it. And those ductile pipes have reached Iraq in 1 week. It's the fastest project on earth that you allocate $3 billion and you spend $1 billion, and these ductile get delivered within the same week, right? So, of course, the supplier now maybe under arrest. So this is one thing. The other thing is the cultural heritage in that site. The approach of dam building as a governmental approach to tackle the water scarcity is completely wrong. Completely wrong. Regardless of the impact, the environmental or cultural impact, it's completely wrong. No one now is building big dams in the world. Everybody knows that big dams have a major negative consequences on the population, on biodiversity, on the economy, on everything. And say, for example, the marshes are marshes just because of availability of water. Now you keep building dams. There is no water left to the marshes. This is the Sumerian heritage. This is a World Heritage Site. This is the only civilization that continues to the very day in exactly the same way of living. Unlike the Egyptians or Indian civilization, the Sumerian civilization is up to the present day were represented by the way of life in the marshes. And you keep building dams. You're spending billions of dollars to build a dam, and you don't even feel sorry for the loss of livelihood in the marshes. So for me, this is very emotional.
Yeah.
I get very emotional because my entire life was allocated to saving the marshes, and I managed with a number of colleagues. I think Sundus, Ambassador Sundus agree with us. She knows, partially at least, of my work. And then I see with my own eyes a decision of a government resulting in repeating what the Saddam, the dictator, has done, without any statement from the Prime Minister, which is a friend, or the then President, Barham Saleh, who initiated the so-called the Rafidain restoration and whatever. We could not save the already restored piece of land that is so significant and important. And we selling the idea of restoring the entire Mesopotamia. Sorry for the emotions.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that it's something that you invested a lot of energy in. It means a lot to you emotionally, so you don't have to apologize for that. We will take one more question, and I will come to this lady here who's been very patient right there.
Thank you. Fatma Shakarchi. I'm a medical doctor from Baghdad, currently affiliated with the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. My question is to Maha. Given the decades of uncertainty in the country, which has led to a crisis mode mentality, and the response that is usually responsive rather than proactive, how do we prioritize a mitigation plan, and how do you prioritize response to climate change, given that its impacts are more on the long term rather than the immediate term?
I think it's the responsibility of the government, of course, to prioritize it. And this is because of the unstable political situation that Iraq has been going through for decades. This issue has always been pushed. It's sometimes considered a luxury issue. That's not a priority. So it requires a leadership within the government. And this is what we lack, a leadership that takes this problem seriously to implement it. And I think also empowering and investing in the civil society, because we saw what kind of effect they have on changing politics in Iraq. I think investing in their capacity and taking their solutions, because we witnessed that they have a wealth of proposals and solutions, working with the communities. They know what is happening on the ground. We're sitting here, we're discussing an issue, and a lot of people haven't even been there and saw what is happening in the marshes. But these people work with them, the activists and civil society, and they do have a solution, but unfortunately, they cannot implement it. And at some point also they were targeted by some actors in Iraq, and some of them have to leave the country or even killed. So it's also
activists who've taken a lot of risk with their personal safety. They've been subjected to violence,
because
kidnapping in some
they
cases,
point that there is a corruption, there is a mismanagement, and they become a target. So empowering them, I think, is one of the solutions to implement better measures.
These are some very brave people we're talking about that could play a very constructive role as a kind of link, perhaps, between the local communities and the state government. And now that there is a new government in office, we can perhaps hope that this issue will get the support and the funding that it deserves. And an important point about individual leaders: if there is leadership, individuals can make a difference and raise awareness on this issue. But thank you very much. Thank you very much to the panel. My apologies to those of you who didn't get the opportunity to ask questions, but I think everyone will still be here, so you could approach our wonderful panelists directly and have a little conversation with them. But thank you very much to Michael, Maha, and Hassan.